Thank you very much, Maurice.
Thank you.
We'll now have a discussant, Dr. Tali Regev, who has a BA in economics from Tel Aviv University and a PhD in economics from MIT, and so he's an economist, and a faculty member at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. She's a labor and macroeconomist with particular interest in inequality and discrimination in markets.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for your very interesting thoughts. And thank you, Nissim, for being the mastermind behind this, me being here. Baron Glassman is concerned about humanity. Swept by force of capital seeking the highest returns, human beings and nature are being treated as commodities. They are being exploited, degraded, and depleted. There is no place for such a system for the virtues and values of human relationships. I hope I'm translating correctly. And no place for, and the intergenerational inheritance is a danger. He is suspicious of both markets and the government. Indeed, markets tend to commodify people and nature, and governments can be at best regulators and redistributors, mitigating the hazards of the market economy, and thus paving the way for the domination of the ethics of the market capitalism. Standard economic thinking of the right, economic liberalism, and the left, Keynesianism, promoting government intervention, or even the third way, Leer and so on, are stuck in a state-market dualism and are missing the critical ingredient of civic institution. The answer, according to this thesis, is in recognizing and allowing for the important role of intermediate institutions, such as universities, professional associations, guilds, vocational colleges, regional banks, unions, or supporter-owned football clubs, for instance, just to name a few examples given. He imagines a system of decentralized institutions that will preserve and apply inherited knowledge and which will place constraint on self-regarding behavior. Such civic institutions are crucial for restoring the trust, sacrifice, and reciprocity needed for human cooperation and for strengthening human relationships and societies at large. I sympathize and share the concern for the state of humans and human interactions as they get trumped up in the rush for gold. I want, however, to focus on one of the bads that the existing economic capitalist system reproduces. Glassman mentions the increasing both income and wealth inequality, but only in a glance. He says the intensification of inequality understood in terms of region and class, as well as monetary and human capital. He talks about that. However, economic inequality is worse in our days than it was in any other period in history. This is true for the American society, but also for many other capitalist countries. Wealth in America, for example, is concentrated at the top. Top earners also make much more than other people. Not only that inequality in outcomes is increasing, social mobility in rich capitalist countries is decreasing. It is therefore impossible to put the distributional question aside when crafting the assumptions for common good economics. One of the mechanisms that generates income inequality in rich capitalist society is human capital. The returns for human capital, skills, networks, and occupational trainings have been increasing in recent years, so that some occupations and skills pay much more than other occupations and skills. In fact, occupations, their training, their ethos, the ethos around them, play a big role in creating the existing class system. Occupations, and especially professions, not only participate in creating the increasing income inequality, they also legitimize it. In fact, the system of income inequality, like any other social system, consists of the material distributions of resources, behaviors, and power. But it also consists of the cultural schemas for enacting that system. This is to say that the capitalist market does not only distribute resources, behavior, and power, it also legitimizes their distribution till they become taken for granted and seem natural or inevitable. The taken for granted rules of the market regarding human capital and occupations is that some skills, some forms of training, some types of experience justify the unequal distribution of income. That some people who belong to some occupation deserve to earn much more than other people. In this system of income inequality, celebrating the intermediate institutions that Glassman celebrates is risky. Universities, professional associations, guilds, vocational colleges, regional bank unions are increasingly participate in creating and legitimizing inequality. So how do these intermediate institutions generate and legitimize inequality? I want to focus here on professions and as an example for intermediate institutions that generate and legitimize inequality. Professions like law and medicine are the more specialized occupations that are also associated with greater pay and status than all other occupations. We perceive the duties that professions perform as very important and responsible duties that require the perfections of exclusive bodies of knowledge. We tend to associate professions with high standards of qualification, competence, education and training, experience, practice, and conduct. Professions tend to exclude, to distinguish between those who belong to profession and those who do not. Professions also tend to organize and self-regulate the conduct of their members. Professions, therefore, become monopolies over specific bodies of skills or knowledge. But because we perceive professional duties and knowledge to be valuable, we perceive the great income that they pay to be justified. In other words, we believe that professionals deserve to be paid for their human capital. Thus, the system not only assigns greater returns to professionals, but justifies these higher returns. The system relies on and reinforces the notion of meritocracy. Like professions, other intermediate institutions organize, exclude, and obtain monopolies over bodies of knowledge. Glasner is rightly worried by the bad outcomes of markets for humanity. He is, however, not suspicious enough with the intermediate institutions and the harm they may generate and legitimize. What is so commendable about Glasner's endeavor, and cannot be overstated, is the constructive alternative he's offering. It is easier to offer a critique than to offer a creative vision, and so I would like to make two such constructive comments. The first is to point to one quite special but extremely old intermediate institution that is perhaps a bit overlooked in Glasner's examples, the institution of the family. Human beings are embedded and flourish in families. Families interact with states and market and share in varying level the responsibility of generating and ensuring welfare. In families, human beings are usually not treated as commodities, and like all other intermediate institutions, families organize, exclude, and obtain monopolies over bodies of knowledge. And thus in families, other forms of inequality arise. Because responsibilities and interaction within the families are not commodified, women who tend to perform them are unpaid and undervalued. If my point about the family is ancient, the second thought I'd like to share is about the future, about technology and its role in organizing our economic and social life. The information technology revolution is creating, right under our radars, new intermediate institutions. Much of our social interaction, or at least our youngsters' social interactions, are organized today through social media. Participation in these civic arenas define who we are, they are, and affect what we value and believe. Borderless communities are formed around common passions, interests, or needs. These new institutions hold the promise of alternative spaces that are free from government and highly democratic. We can participate, express, share, exchange, create, finance, and even match. With their possibility of anonymity and almost blind accessibility, these spaces also hold the promise of equality. Yet, perhaps not surprising by now, research begins to uncover the ominous, all-reaching nature of exclusion and discrimination even in these virtual spaces, such as in eBay, Prosper, Airbnb, etc. Indeed, inequality seems to be the one end results wherever we interact, perhaps because wherever we go, we bring with us our cultural beliefs and scripts and the power relations embedded in them. To some, I'd like to celebrate with Glassman the assumptions of common good economics. At the same time, I'm worried about inequality and the possible contribution of intermediate institutions to it. Systems of inequality tend to be overdetermined. They tend to be created and maintained by multiple complementary processes acting simultaneously at different social systems, like the market, the states, and the family. The processes at any one system implicate some process at other systems. Norms of one system are diffused to all other systems, and material distributions at one system affect distributions in others. And because social systems are also interrelated, such that what happens in the family affects the market and what happened in the state affects the market, it is impossible to think of the market and leave the distributional issues aside for the state to deal with. Because even if the distributional question was dealt with by the state, the distributional problem would still arise in markets. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.